This is a flip-top coffee table, and to make it, I cut up a very expensive slab, screwed a motor to it, had an existential crisis, and then became a seamstress. Let me show you how I got here.
I want a new coffee table.
I'd like a new ottoman.
But we have this chaise.
Correction, you have the chaise. I have discomfort.
But coffee tables are nicer.
Ottomans are comfier.
Coffee table.
Ottoman.
Coffee table.
Ottoman.
So I think I've come up with a solution that might make us both happy, but I have no idea if I can pull it off.
As it turned out, pulling it off would be far more challenging than I ever thought, and the payoff was nearly a complete disaster. Almost a year ago, I picked up this slab of white oak along with a couple of smaller pieces from my friend Suman down south of the border.
He has a problem. He has a crazy amount of lumber. So I came here to help him out, and to do that, I'm just stealing it.
I've been saving these for a special project like this, but there was a problem.
These slabs, I believe, were cut with a chainsaw. Not an Alaskan chainsaw mill, just a chainsaw. Freehand. Because they are all sorts of rustic. And the big slab that I'm going to use for the top, well, whoever Suman got them from decided to put finish on. Not a big deal, except for they only put finish on one side, which caused the entire thing to turn into a giant Pringle.
Just because you have a slab doesn't mean that you need to keep the live edge. I love the look of a tabletop that doesn't have any seams between boards glued together, and I like that look enough to justify the added expense that a huge slab costs. You're probably thinking two things right now. One, what the heck, Scott? You got this slab for free. And two, you're removing the character. And to that I say, first, yes I know. And second, of all the adjectives in woodworking, I find the word character is one of the most misused. Character and good design are not the same thing. Character is built over a lifetime of use, not something you can force into a design. I'm looking at you, overpriced, faux distressed and weathered table from Pottery Barn.
Now I could grab a router and a router sled to flatten these, but I feel like they're so far off of being flat that it might take eons with a router. So instead, I have something faster but maybe slightly more crude in mind.
Yep, that's a power plane. I honestly didn't know if this was going to take less time and effort than using a router sled, but I also don't have a router sled anymore since I had thrown away my old one quite some time ago. So I wanted to see if I could get away without making another one. I don't know about you folks, but I get in my head about a lot of things. When it comes to making decisions on what's the best way to do a task in woodworking, I can dwell on it for far too long, weighing the pros and cons, when I could have just made a quick decision and got it started already. This is exacerbated by the fact that I can potentially have hundreds of thousands of people questioning my decisions. I think someone more optimistic than I would call this being a perfectionist, and while I believe I'm generally a very positive person, I don't think that being a perfectionist is always a good thing. I can spend 2 months laboring over the details of this seemingly simple coffee table, while others will be on their fourth piece of furniture by now. That being said, I am proud to say that in this instance, I made a snap decision, grabbed the power plane, and got to work right away with lots of energy and enthusiasm, and without questioning my decision.
Well, that was exhausting, and I'm questioning whether the power plane was more or less effort than a router sled would be in the end. And after all that, I think I'm going to have to make a router sled to take it down to final thickness. Now, don't get me wrong, the slab is very close to being flat, but overnight it developed a slight twist to it, and I'm worried that if I attack it with the power plane again, I could make a misstep and put a gouge into it pretty easily. I could also use a hand plane to take it down to final thickness, but this is white oak, it's very hard, and I am not built for such strenuous activities.
At any rate, the slab didn't seem to be stable, so I wanted to leave it as is to see if it wanted to move any more before flattening it to final thickness. But for some reason, I'm getting the track saw. Wait, what are you doing? Now is a good time to show you the design I had been brewing. Ignore this relic of the 70s. I want a coffee table that has a top that can flip over to the underside where there'll be an upholstered cushion. And I wanted to do it automatically with the push of a button. So I set about drawing something up, and I went through many iterations. Some were way too complicated and some were just plain grody. At this point, I didn't know if I could make the flip-top mechanism work, and I still needed to figure out how to make it look like a piece of fine furniture since my boss is pretty stringent. But I had to push forward.
It's time to begin the basin. I'm going to start out with the legs of my coffee table. Now, the design I drew up is not the most straightforward, but anything with multiple curves usually starts out as something that is flat and square to begin with, so I'm going to need some 4-inch square leg blanks to get what I'm after.
This project is a great example of why sometimes a table saw isn't the most important tool in your shop. I think I used it maybe 3 times in this whole build. Of course, this entirely depends on what you're building, but if you get interested in making things less straight, square, and boxy, the table saw can take a back seat to the bandsaw. This isn't me saying that I'll be ditching my table saw anytime soon, although my secondhand, industrially abused, imported Taiwanese 25-year-old table saw does deserve to be chucked off a cliff. I don't own a CNC, nor do I have the room for one, but I do have a 3D printer, so I asked it to make me templates. The printer bed isn't large enough, so I designed one that can be clicked together with a bit of CA glue. Have you ever pet a cat before? Sometimes it's easier said than done. Moreover, have you ever pet a cat in reverse? By that I mean starting at the butt and ending at the neck. It's a great way to end up injured. Similarly, going against the grain when pattern routing can also land you in the emergency room. There was no way around it. I was going to go severely against the grain while trimming half of the legs. I've wanted this router bit for probably years at this point, and I'm happy I bought it because it had no problems going against the grain. And while you can't buy a safer cat, you can buy a safer router bit, even if it also looks like a little menace. Oh, and 3D printed templates? Not such a good idea. Because the table saw didn't get used much in this project, I found myself using my super high-end boutique bandsaw a lot more. It would have been the MVP of the build if it didn't fight me at every single possible moment, like when the tire on the upper wheel decided to take a little vacation and cause me to lose a day waiting for a replacement to arrive, or like when one of the trunnion locks snapped off under the lightest suggestion of pressure, or like when I nearly couldn't cut the curve on the inside of the legs because it isn't big enough.
Have I mentioned that I want a new bandsaw?
I learned something about myself in this build. Like most people, my brain consists of 2 halves, but I have a slight beef with them. On the Martha Stewart side of my brain, I'm the creative starving artist who's content behind a drum set, or a guitar, or cooking, or crocheting, or anything that's extremely hard to make a living out of, which is why I spent my 20s as a broke musician trying to be the next Radiohead. The other half of my brain, the Elon Musk side, if you will, relishes in data, complex numbers, magnetomotive forces, or anything that would have labeled me as the least eligible bachelor of 2023 if I didn't trick Rachel into thinking I was cooler than I actually was. This is why I went back to school for electrical engineering as a mature student after failing to make a career out of music. As if this wasn't enough, there is little to no communication between my upstairs Martha and Elon, and this issue is perfectly epitomized by this coffee table build. I either get completely immersed in the creative flow, as you'll see as I spend far too long laboring over the perfect aesthetic, or I go full-on Oppenheimer and waste days of my life soldering and programming electronics together to eventually send this coffee table to the moon. No joke. I'm sure I'm not the only person who wishes to have better balance between the 2 halves of their brains. I mean, we don't want to actually end up like Martha or Elon. That'd be catastrophic. The only thing that I've built from a set of plans in my life was this pantry router from Matthias Wandel. Otherwise, I've designed everything I've made. I think the whole reason why I got into furniture making as a teenager was to see my drawings and designs come to life. And yes, designing furniture in high school doesn't exactly make you one of the cool kids. When it comes to furniture design, I always think aesthetics should come first, and I figure out the build process after. It's like in music. All you need is a good song. You can be the most technically proficient musician in the world, but if you don't have a good song, no one is listening. When it comes to furniture, design a phenomenal piece that forces someone to want it. Worry about how to put it together later. Be a Paul McCartney, not a Steely Dan. For example, when I came up with the idea for the legs for this coffee table, I really liked the idea of extending the inside curve up to the top because I thought it looked great. But when it came time to execute it, well, for one, I cursed my past self for making my current life difficult, but when I accepted that past Scott was right, I knew I had to figure out how to join two curved surfaces together. I could have made life easier and squared off the portion at the top of the leg that meets the apron, but I would have sacrificed one of my favorite parts of the design to make life easier in the build. One of the biggest influences for this coffee table was cars. I'm sure you're thinking, well, that's dumb. Cars go vroom. Well, let me explain. When I look at a more modern car, I like that there are no flat surfaces, but there are still visible edges combined with subtle shaping. I guess if I'm drawing parallels, then something like a standard square cabinet with flat surfaces would be like a Ford Model T. Something like a Bombay chest with all curves and no edges is like a Chevy Bel Air. But what I'm after, something with clean lines and subtle curves, will be more akin to the new 2024 Dodge Charger. I mean, it looks just like it. Can't you tell? This was almost as far as my drawing was going to take me, but there was still something off. I didn't like how it looked like there should be a tabletop that sits on top of the apron and legs. And since I couldn't make a flip-top coffee table like that,
I think I am going to make a bold move.
While sometimes past Scott is right, other times he is wrong. And either way, I still like to curse him, because now I had to deal with fixing something that didn't look right in the original design that would have been far easier to execute from the beginning. Like how I had to come dangerously close to cutting into the domino hole in the center divider. Sometimes you just have to be flexible and not be rigidly beholden to your original plan. Wait a minute, I forgot to tell you about this divider. Well, remember when it looked like I was about to cut the slab right in half for the top? Well, that's because I did cut the slab in half for the top. You see, my thinking was, what's better than a coffee table with a flip top? A coffee table with two flip tops, so I can have my feet up on one side while the other side can be normal. I'm realizing right now that the fact that I cut my coffee table in half is quite possibly the Martha and Elon hemispheres of my noggin trying to incarnate themselves into physical existence. I feel like I'm still harboring more resentment towards the word character, so clearly I'm not done that rant. This is a knot. I don't like it. Some people say that knots give a piece of furniture character. I disagree. Knots are ugly and are not to be confused with curl, burl, crotch, quilting, feathering, or any other type of figuring in wood. And if I've learned anything from this, it's to choose your slab more carefully. Or in my case, find friends with better slabs to steal. Do you ever put off making something until you can no longer put it off? Well, that's me in a nutshell. And that's what I did with this router sled. It's kinda like a good sneeze. You know you need to, and it can be a little bit violent in the process, but the result is a feeling of relief. Until you realize that there's something else you've been putting off making, just like realizing you have another sneeze in you. Do you ever get nervous about trying new techniques on projects? Don't worry, I would imagine the majority of people are like that. When you've spent many hours on a project, the instinct should be to preserve your hard work from risks. However, I am not like that. For some unfortunate reason, I like to take risks, and while sometimes they work out, other times they do not, as you'll see later on in this video.
Although I am really liking how everything is turning out so far, I'm a little worried that it's a bit too formal for my tastes. So there is a technique that I've always wanted to try, and I think I'm going to risk it and do it on this for the very first time. And it might make it a little more handcrafted, maybe, or I could completely ruin it.
I said that a healthy dose of inspiration for this table came from outside the woodworking world, but there was equally just as much inspiration from within our community, namely this desk designed by Nick Padula. And what I really liked about it was the texture he added to the aprons. This sent me down a rabbit hole of different techniques, and I found a channel called On Wood that gave me the idea to sweep the texture in the direction of the apron curve. After 15 minutes of practice, I dove straight into carving the aprons. While there is room for improvement, I definitely was satisfied with my first attempt at this on a project, and I highly recommend adding a technique like this to your arsenal. I picked up these Nerix firmer gouges from Taylor Toolworks, and if you'd like to try this out for yourself, I'll leave a link for them below. If I can figure this out, anyone can. Now is the point where I need to figure out how I was going to make the tops actually flip. And this isn't your grandma's janky-ass flip-top tool cart. This is one of those classy flip-top coffee tables that are all the rage with the youngins right now. So I said no to the typical iron pipe method and recessed in these ultra-bougie pillow block bearings instead. Ooh, spinny. If I were sensible, I would have stopped right here. Well, if I were actually sensible, I probably wouldn't have made a flip-top coffee table to begin with, so I guess that ship sailed. But here's the junction in the road that I went down, and I went down a world of pain. This is a motor, because as I mentioned briefly in the beginning, I want this coffee table to flip on its own. And to control this motor, and to make it flip successfully, my world of pain included, but was not limited to, actuators, microcontrollers, H-bridge controllers, Hall effect sensors, capacitive sensors, and accelerometers. And connecting all of these things together where I wanted them to discreetly be forced me to route a bunch of strange and complicated channels under the divider and behind an apron. People are very encouraging to me, which is great at face value, but I think what I need is for someone to tell me, no, just stop. Are current millennials the product of a lack of discipline? I don't know. You tell me.
As much as I've been putting it off, it's time to glue up the base. And there is a big challenge with this, but I think I've come up with a solution. When I go to put a big clamp from one leg all the way to the other to squeeze the joints together, the apron wants to creep up like this because of the curved joint face. To combat this, I have milled down this thin strip of MDF, and its thickness is the same as the offset between the top of the apron and the top of the leg. And I'm going to take an F-clamp and clamp the whole apron down to my workbench, and hopefully when I go to put on the big clamp across the whole thing, it will prevent the apron from creeping up.
I might be 32 years old, but being a woodworker has made me into a bit of an old man.
Pumping the tunes, man. Jeez.
And yet other times,
Oh yeah. That's the stuff.
I'm still a 12-year-old boy.
It's pretty tight. That looks... Oh, put my hair in the glue.
So the glue up, I think, went okay. It seems relatively square. Now is the last point in the base where I could possibly completely screw it up, and that is gonna be shaping the outside corner of the leg. Now I wanna lop off this whole corner, and you can see my layout line here and my layout line right here that follows the inside curve of the leg. Now the issue, as you can see, my tenon, which is laid out right here, looks like is going to intersect the curve that I'm about to shape, but I'm like 70% sure I'm not going to hit it.
The power plane again? It works. I couldn't really think of anything better to use in this scenario, honestly. I suppose a jigsaw would have worked, but I'm a little wary of blade deflection. I bet you're thinking to yourself, hey Scott, you could have just cut that before on the bandsaw. Nah, I wouldn't have been able to put a clamp in the right spot on the legs during glue up. Sometimes my incessant overthinking does save my ass. When the top is not flipping, I need a way to lock it in place, otherwise it wouldn't make for a very good coffee table. I'm going to be using a bolt, much like a door lock bolt, to hold it in place, which will be driven by a linear actuator that you'll see later. So I made something similar to escutcheon plates, one that gets screwed to the top and one that gets screwed to the base for the bolt to pass through both at the same time. The shear strength of the bolt is what keeps the top from spinning, and I looked it up. An 8mm bolt has a shear strength of 3,300 pounds. Escutcheon is kind of a funny word. If you've never heard of it before, that's what you call a plate that surrounds a traditional keyhole. Apparently, it comes from the Old French escusson, from the Latin root meaning shield. This is a Scott Walsh signature move right here, epoxying rubberized cork on the bottom of table legs. I haven't seen anyone do it before, so I'm pretty sure I invented it. Even if I didn't, just let me believe that I did. I need that. I broke one of my main rules. Always test a new combination of finish and wood. I'm very familiar with regular Osmo Pollux, and this is not the first time I've used white oak, but it is the first time I've used them together. However, my thought was that Osmo tends to not darken or yellow as much as other hard wax oils do. I was pretty surprised how much the oak turned dark on me, and I was regretting not testing the finish immediately. If I had, I probably would have gotten something like Osmo Raw, as I was very used to the look of natural white oak at this point. But I had to push on. Time to finally assemble this bad boy. Those shafts get locked into a flange that's screwed to the base, and those bearings make the top spin like a top. That was a weird simile. C-channel gets screwed into the base in a seemingly wrong way, but all of these things that get mounted under here will be covered with an upholstered cushion. My escusson plates get installed and are looking spiffy in black, and the actuator sends the bolt straight through, locking the top into place. The motor that does the flippy motion gets mounted back into place, and this black box containing most of the brains of the operations gets temporarily situated. This red thing says touch, and it gets hidden in the apron so you can't actually touch it. And there are a couple of magnets for each side that tells the brains of the operation when the top is approaching its desired position. Stuffing the wires in the recess was not the most elegant thing I've ever done. This switch turns the whole coffee table on and off. That's kind of a weird thing to say. And this jack is how I charge the coffee table. Also a weird thing to say. This is not the most graceful installation, and wouldn't you know it, would end up becoming an issue. So I'm not sure what happened. It was working before, but when I went to hide the wires in the divider, now this thing kind of has a mind of its own, and it just wants to keep turning whenever I turn it on. So it's acting like someone's constantly pressing the button for it to turn. What I think happened is that when I was trying to hide the wires in here, one of the wires got pinched and now it's all screwed up. So I'm gonna have to do that all over again. He says as if he didn't just beat on it with a hammer. A broken connection caused two of the touch sensors to burn out, so after fixing it, I tried again. You can do it!
Where are you going? No, 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 no.
Is this the look of regret or what?
All right, I think I have got this all figured out now. Let me show you how it works. So I just push there. And that side goes. Push there. And that side goes. That was pretty cool.
After days of suppression, the Martha half of my brain was ready to rear its ugly head. Not with convictions of insider trading, but with something far worse. Fabric. To fulfill my Ottoman dreams, I was going to have to, make it soft and squishy. And that meant going down the road of a whole different craft. Sewing and upholstery and things. Look, I'm using a sewing machine. Now I know what you're gonna say. Those electronics probably produce 25,000 BTUs of heat, and you're gonna cover it up with an inch of foam? You're gonna burn your house down. Relax. Elon Scott already figured out that the components produce no perceivable heat when idle. Plus, there's an off switch for the whole thing, and I'll just keep the coffee table turned off when I'm not flipping it. That's also a weird thing to say.
All right, it's time to see if this is gonna work. All right, coffee table, flip. That wasn't good. Okay. Yes, 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 yeah. I am so over this. So it seems that the cushions are rubbing against the aprons slightly, and that's enough to cause it to mess up. So maybe I need to fiddle around with some things. I think I have an idea. I think when the side of the cushion rubs on the table base, the motor actually starts to slip on the coupler. I'm gonna replace this coupler with one that has a set screw. Let's see if this will work. Time to reprogram the coffee table because that's a normal thing to do. Trying to plug this USB cable into the Arduino is not easy. I did not give myself good access at all. Let's see if I figured it out. Both sides still don't work after all that.
While I continue to mess with the electronics, let me show you some glamour shots.
Well, it's not perfect, but I'm pretty sick of the electronics right now, so I'm gonna go move on with my life. Bye.